Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to this meeting, a very interesting meeting. And also would like to thank all of you for being here this morning. As has been said in the program, I will talk about the preconception screening for single gene disorders in IVF patients and gamete donors. As a disclosure, I'm a full employee of an international company dedicated to, with commercial interest in this field. We all know that in healthcare in general, we known risks, and because of that, those known risks, we have preventive measures, many in different parts in the healthcare, let's say, like if you travel, drink and eat safely, or get exercise to avoid obesity, don't smoke because of cancer risks, and so on. We can continue on that. We know the risks, so we can establish preventive measures and recommendations. If we move not into genetics, for example, it is so well known the prevention of or risks, or understanding the risks during the pregnancy, where women go through different tests in order to determine if there is risk or not, to establish if they agree preventive measures for that. In general, we can say then that the burden of genetic disease is huge, not only for the chromosomal, but if we take into consideration other rare disease, we can establish something that the different data sources, you can find that there are something like about 7,000 rare disease that has a significant impact in the society, especially in children, and most of these are of genetic origin. So we see then that there is a necessity to understand the genetic burden in order to prevent this condition. But how big is the content that we can study or analyze? Regarding the gene content in the human genome, we may consult different databases, and the three main are here. Are these, the Ensemble, RESIC, and UniProt. They are curating and collecting protein coding genes, and nowadays there is established that found in all three there are about 19,000, almost 500 genes. So this is the content currently and still not precisely defined for the genes in our human genome. This was the previous number thought before the Human Genome Project, and now we are here, still working on that. But not for all these genes we know a phenotype association. So we cannot provide in the screening field. We can use it for diagnosis, but not in the screening field. We cannot provide information regarding phenotype for many of them. Indeed, if you go to the well-known online Mendelian inheritance data catalog, this is collected very recently, you can see here that about 5,000, almost 300 genes have phenotype description and molecular basis known. So it's going to be out of this content that we can provide a test to prevent conditions. We must take out here for carrier screening those that are this is autosomal, is linked, and so on. Here, obviously, we have a huge quantity of genes related to autosomal dominant that we will not study during the screening. There are still ongoing works to curate this type of content from the hominin, like the well-known Clean Gene Consortia that is curating genes to provide standardized information for in the field, let's say, for all the providers of this and diagnosis as well. It is important to understand that this curation of genes is related as well for, includes also autosomal dominant genes. So you can see that it's not, even we may say that we are processing whole exome and we are understanding we are testing or capturing sequence for the whole content, about 20,000. The number of genes that we can provide information related to a described phenotype is about no more than 10% of the current content, including only recessive and X-linked genes. This is to enter, to have a starting point for the aim of this type of test, now when known as expanded, because it's not anymore focused to a small number of genes. The aim of expanded carrier screening test obviously is to identify healthy heterozygotes individuals in order to provide information to promote health, and at the same time you are giving reproductive choice to these individuals or couple or woman, maybe through natural conception and prenatal if they like, or through assisted reproduction techniques, including gamete donation. My focus of the results later in the talk will be in this related to assisted reproductive techniques. These type of tests are based on new technology. Most of the providers and the clinical lab offering this carrier screening test are using NGS technology. You can use array also, but most are moving to NGS. And because of the huge quantity of data that you obtain from those analyses, you need bioinformatic tools in order to process and curate the thousands and millions of reads that you are obtaining from each test, from each sample. The field has increased in the last years. That's why there are committee opinions or recommendations about how to treat and how to go through the process of carrier screening. Not anymore although it's possible, is focused only on ethnicity, the recommendation regarding which gene has to be tested. Most of the panels or tests are pan-ethnic, and that's why the expanded carrier screening. In this committee opinion, because of a previous report regarding the implementation of the test, was already accepted and as a strategy for carrier screening, at least for all pregnant women or wishing to be pregnant, we should offer the CF, spinal muscular atrophy, thalassemias, and Fragile X. Also, we have to discuss regarding the residual risk. And for the content of disease, there are certain recommendations about what to include and what not. Although the technology and the knowledge is increasing and this type of content is not well defined and in the time is changing. Something that is important and has been already published in several papers in the field is that it is important to have a high detection rate, especially for recessive conditions, because when you are testing a couple, you are having the square of the risk of the residual risk will be impacted by your detection rate. For example, in this slide, you can see if we may have a nice, a good one detection rate of 98%, for example, like for the CFTR gene. This is for one individual. When you test the couple, your detection risk rate, will be that, will decrease somehow. So at the end, you will have obviously a residual risk. So even having obviously a good analytical test and a good clinical detection rate, still you will miss some alleles, some mutated alleles in the population. And you have to consider that in order to provide appropriate counseling. To get better, and that's why most of the providers is moving to NGS, to get better, higher detection rate and minimal residual risk. There are several papers in the literature showing that NGS is better to find out mutations. Obviously, because array-based assays, they can only add as a content known mutations, and when you go through NGS, you can find new mutations that maybe you can disclosure in real time, or you can collect, and after several analyses, you can improve your content of the carrier screening. So that's why NGS is a technology that is mostly applied for carrier screening, expanded carrier screening currently. Something important about residual risk that I think that we must consider, because it's not, let's say, a straightforward calculation, and indeed there is not enough information for some of the genes still in the catalog of the online in Mendelian inheritance, but residual risk is known. Obviously, you have a genetic test that is assuming that is well designed analytically. Performance is good, and a negative result, you will have a residual risk that most of the calculation are based on public studies or information in different databases that obviously they will have intrinsic limitation regarding which is the population, what methodology used in that. So that will impact how you get the estimation for the residual risk. Indeed, we all know that residual risk is dependent on many different variables and parameters. Like here you see is test dependent. Obviously, it depends on the design and the performance. That is the analytical sensitivity related to this. Also, to disease incidence, gene content is not the same, the number of variants described for a given gene, that may be CFTR, compared to maybe the beta thalassemia, HBV gene. And also is impacted, is dependent on the frequency. It's not the same if you have a founder mutation for a gene, and it's not the same the type of mutation. Different types can do the analysis for single nucleotide variants, point mutations, or small deletion duplications, but maybe they cannot test for copy number variation, big deletions like the half of the gene or the whole gene deleted. So that will impact also the residual risk, as well as obviously the is population dependent, not only by ethnicity, but also because of geographical distribution. There are many papers in the literature describing the frequency, how change north to south, even in a single country. So what I wanted to show here is that getting a residual risk calculation and estimation based on different studies is not a straightforward thing. For example, for the well-known CFTR, you can take the information from one database like the well-known HGMD, and you see here that as a pathogenic detrimental or disease-causing mutation, you get that figure there, almost 1,600 mutations, including different type of mutation, including copy number variation. Then you can go to, this is the other one is more general. They have for most of the genes in the human genome. When you go to a more specialized database, focusing only in the CFTR, you can find there that there is, as they say, enough evidence just for 312 variants, disease-causing mutations in this case. So again, depending of the source that you get and how you obtain the residual risk, is it may have an impact in the counseling for the patients. Taking all this information, we design a test that we call CGT, and the early version was based, we started almost 5 years ago, and we started using NGS technology and with an expanded gene content of, at that time, almost 550 genes. Currently, we are using the version 2 that is based on, this was a content specifically for the genes. This is like a panel gene content, the first version. The second one, the current one that we have, is based on a commercial kit, Illumina TrueSight 1, that is capturing information for about almost 4,800 genes, including also dominant. We took out of this content that we can say is at that time the clinical exome, not the whole exome, the clinical exome for those genes that we know the phenotype. We only obviously provide, just to clarify this, autosomal dominant here, it means that this content have genes for autosomal dominant, but we don't use those genes for carrier screening, okay? All the content that we have is autosomal recessive and is linked, and we have curated this number of mutations for those genes. Because of the difficulty for certain mutations, type of mutations, we have complementary tests, for example, for Fragile X, the CGG repeat expansion, the expansion, or the deletion for spinal muscular atrophy, Duchenne, and others that NGS technology and bioinformatic tools are not good enough in order to provide a higher, good sensitivity. We are now validating the new version will be based on whole exome because of other in the company other aims for other tests, and we will move from TrueSight 1. We are validating, we are not providing this information, and we expect to arrive to a content about, we are in the process of curating, but probably, as I mentioned, including recessive and mislinked, at about 2,000 genes, but we are still in the process of validating that. And this type of analysis allows you to also make, as I will show you later, customized analysis on demand for certain couples. Not only offering the content that we have curated in the test, for the test. And for curation of the variants, obviously, we follow, and all the providers follow the standards and guideline recommendations by ACMG and AMP for how to interpret the variants that we find. There are several parameters and criteria how to do it. I'm not going to enter that. But something that is important to understand is that to collect all the information needed to make a proper variant interpretation by following the standards and guidelines mentioned previously, you have to use, there are public sources there like the CEFTOR or Intervar and others, or maybe you have, these are different criteria. It means like something like pathogenic, strong, or moderate, and so on, and benign as well, obviously. And that's the way, following those criteria, that's how you can make a proper interpretation for variants. You can use also proprietary tools if you want. We design our own proprietary tool in order to understand the risk for a given couple, for a position, if they were sharing or not, or different position but in the same genes. So taking into consideration all this, we published our early experience in the field in 2015. This is the content that we published at that time, mainly for this number of samples. Almost half were donors and half patients. Out of these patients, most of them were going to use gamete donation, but also were included couples that both were keeping the gametes and going through the carrier screening test. As a summary for that analysis, we found out in our population that about 5% of the couples were at risk of having, they were entering the clinic because of the fertility. Then the clinic offered the test and they find out that they were carrier of a recessive or is linked. Maybe here the hemophilia A is impacting this figure because this is a severe mutation, but it's not that frequent in the population, the inversion 22, intron 22. But anyway, this is what we found. And for the donor program, following recommendations, obviously you have to test at least the genes that I mentioned previously when you want to offer safely to the patients. But in our experience, what we found, obviously the one of our main providers one of our main customers for this test is taking these steps for analyzing the donor program. So you can see here the karyotype will discard exclusion rate about 2% in their experience. And fragile leaks about that figure you find there, and also other is-linked genes in the CGT test will exclude about 1% approximately. So once you have the donor tested for this, and obviously infections and other recommendations and tests that you have followed before having accepted donor. But related to genetics, you have a pool of tested donors is created, and then a patient entering the clinic can use that information. We provide that as a blinded system. So the patient that is receiving a donation will know that there is not sharing for a gene, there is not risk, but maybe the donor is carrier for something, because we assume that all are carriers. We know that in certain countries you have to disclose the information, and we work like that for if it's demanded, but mostly we use the blinded systems. I mentioned before that using NGS you can provide analysis on demand, not only focus it to the curated list of variants. For example, in this case, we were attending a couple that both were heterozygote compounds, so no way to go way to go, but obviously having unaffected. So they decide to get a donation. So because of that, if I'm not going to enter into the disease and the gene, but we, in our content of curated variants, we have about 50 mutations of the most common variants for this gene. Obviously, there are more than that. So if you go to this database, you can find that almost 1,000 variants. And that's why we provided the test. Obviously, we did the analysis for the full content of the CGT, testing all the genes and all the variants. And then we specifically focus also in this gene to be sure that the donor was negative for all the published mutations in that for this gene. So at the same time, when you are using NGS, you can provide a customized and on-demand test when you know that one of the patient or two are already known carriers. These are our experience, but we are not obviously the only one providing information regarding carrier screening, expanded carrier screening and findings. I will show you some of the publications now, and it depends for you to have all the background. Obviously, the panel is going to be different, and the population as well. So that may impact how the figures, the real number, the actual numbers in each of the studies. But something that you have, you may take out of all of these papers, published paper, is that obviously a carrier rate is a significant part of the population, and will depend obviously of the content of genes and population tested. This by the previous one by Franasiak, as we saw, and this one you see also a small content, but still you see there is risk. This is well known because the incidence of single gene disorders is already impacting the society. Another publication.
Julio, just a couple of minutes left.
Sure. I'm almost finished. And again, if you go to a higher content, you will see a higher risk detected for couples. And at the end, as a summary, you may have that expanded carrier screening, identify a significant number of healthy individuals as carriers. You have the range here between the different studies and the average of variance per individual. And tested couples have genetic risk in a range of 1 out of 150 or 1 out of 20, depending on the content and the population. Something important, expanded carrier screening identifies around 1% of female donors as is-linked carriers. So there is a high direct risk, 25% risk of having unaffected. So it's important to test. And again, because of the residual risk, screen negative results reduce the likelihood of having risk, but still remains there. So obviously I'm here, we are an international company, the team is huge, and I would like to thank many of them in different teams, and all of you for attending me. Thank you.